Hey everyone, my name's Dom, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got something a little bit different, or at least a little bit different for me, because we're going to take a look at the best books that I have read, according to everyone else on Goodreads. So, are there surprises in store? Let's go find out. So first things first, if you've been here before, you'll notice that we've got a change of setup today. That's because I'm going to be using the computer, which is right in front of me. And this also gives me an opportunity, though, to answer that question that I've been asked a few times of, why don't I film in front of my bookcases? So as you can see, I've got bookcases there in the background, and there's really not a lot of room because I've got a 6-year-old daughter and 2 cats, and this room, the study, is also home to most of their toys, and also is where the cats generally live and where they sleep. So there's not any room in front of the bookcases. They're in a corner and it's a bit on the dark side. The lighting's not great in here, so that's why I film against a nice blank wall in the bedroom. So with the bookcases behind me, I've got one for myself, one for my wife. I'll label them up. I'll put mine in pink and my wife's in blue because, you know, when it comes to gender, colours don't mean anything. And if I just move the camera along, I've got another bookcase there, which is at the end of the desk, so again, can't get in front of that one. So there's the answer to that age-old question, why I don't film in front of my bookcases. So the other thing to mention today is this is the second time I'm filming this, so to answer my own question from the intro, no, for me at least, there will not be any surprises. I filmed this video yesterday and came to make a start on editing last night, and I've had some computer issues and basically the entire folder with all the video files had been deleted and was unrecoverable. So it's Saturday morning and I'm filming it again, so let's just get straight into it and see what my top 10 best books according to Goodreads are. So running straight to the top of the list, and in the number 1 spot we've got Brandon Sanderson with The Way of Kings Part 2. Because I'm in the UK and I read Way of Kings in paperback, these were split into 2 volumes, so actually the top 2 on the list are both Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings. So I've got Part 1 with an average rating of 4.65 and Part 2 in the number 1 slot with an average rating of 4.79 from a little bit over 15,000 ratings. So no real surprise there, because a lot of people do say The Way of Kings is the best of the Stormlight Archive books. It's certainly the best one I've read, but then it's also the only one that I've read so far. But a lot of people rate the Stormlight Archive as one of their top series of all time, even though it's not finished yet, so I don't think there's really any surprise to see it so high up on the list. What I did think was interesting about this one, though, is because I've got the 2 volumes, I did notice that the single volume Way of Kings was only rated, I think it was 4.61, so it's kind of suggesting that the sum is less than the value of its parts, but that's not necessarily the case, because obviously different people with different reading tastes, and I'm sure you'll have plenty of people as well who've read the 2 split volumes like I have, who've just given it 1 overall score on the single volume title. So I wouldn't look at those ratings and think that they actually mean anything, but I just thought it was a little bit interesting. So in the number 2 slot on the list is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, book 7 of the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. This has got a 4.62 rating average from a little bit over 3 million ratings. And you will notice as we go through this list that books that are part of a series, and reading fantasy, most of the books that I read are part of a series, but it tends to be the later books in the series that have the higher ratings. A couple of reasons for that. For my personal experience, I do tend to find that I prefer the books, or give a higher rating at least to the books as they get further into a series, because generally speaking we've had a more developed world, more developed characters, the plot's really ramping up as the series reaches its climax. So I generally find that I do like kind of final books in a series more than the earlier books, and we see that through the list here as well. The other reason, of course, is that in most instances, if people don't like the earlier books in the series, they're not going to continue on, so they're not going to get to these final books in the series. So the people who've rated the final books in the series will generally be the ones who really like the series anyway, so it's potentially going to kind of skew the ratings, if you like. So it's not really a surprise for me to see that a lot of the books in this list are actually going to be the books that come later on in the series. So second spot, last book in the Harry Potter series at 4.62. So moving on to book 3 then, and this is probably the one that's going to be the biggest surprise on this list because it's kind of a smaller title. It's not one that I'm aware of anyone else who knows of it, at least until I mentioned it in the Wizardly Duo Discord to see if anyone has heard of it, and the answer there was no. But a few people had to look at it and said it sounded quite interesting, and that's basically exactly what I thought. So this is title called Retribution. It's book 9 out of a 10-book series called Galaxy's Edge, and it's by Jason Anspach and Nick Cole. This one's got just under 1,200 ratings at an average of 4.6, and again, it's book 9 of a 10-book series, so once more the later books in the series getting the higher average rating overall. This one, I found it a couple of years ago. I was reading Star Wars books, and Galaxy's Edge, a book called Galaxy's Edge, had just been released or was just about to be released, and I was looking for a bit more info on it. So everywhere that I looked at that point, it was just the theme park that the book was a tie-in for that was coming up. So when I searched for Galaxy's Edge book, this series came up, and it piqued my interest, so I took a look at it. So the series itself is a sci-fi, very heavily military-focused sci-fi series. The characters in it are all kind of crack troops. They're a bit like the clone troopers actually from Star Wars. And certainly when I was reading up about the series, a lot of people were saying kind of the one-line summary, if you like, is what if the stormtroopers were actually really good at their jobs and could hit the target and so forth. Personally, I definitely see that that kind of likeness, but I do relate them more to the clone troopers rather than the stormtroopers. But it was a really good series, actually. I really enjoyed it. I've read all 10 books, and if you like military sci-fi, I do recommend it. Okay, so number 4 on the list. So we move past 1, 2, 3 more Harry Potter books and another Galaxy's Edge book before we get to number 4 on the list, which is The Wise Man's Fear by Patrick Rothfuss, book 2 in the Kingkiller Chronicle. So this one's got a 4.54 average rating. Comes as a little bit of a surprise for me, seeing that this one's rated. It's got an average rating higher than The Name of the Wind, which is at 4.51, a couple of places below it on this list. But I don't know whether that's kind of that series bias again, where obviously it's a second book in a series, so people are going to read the first book first, so you're not going to necessarily be dealing with all the people who didn't like the first book, so they're just not going to carry on with the second book and so forth. For me though, I mean, I rated Name of the Wind 4 stars. Wise Man's Fear was only a 3-star read for me, and it's one that I've said in other videos previously, but I just can't see why this one is rated so highly. 4.54 for me is, well, that's the Wise Man's Fear punching way above its weight as far as I'm concerned. I know there's plenty of people who love the book and love the series, but it's not for me. I'm not one of them. I definitely think this is higher up in the list than it deserves to be, but we'll see what else is coming along. And the next one on the list in place 5 is A Storm of Swords. So that's Song of Ice and Fire book 3 by George R.R. Martin. This one's got an average rating of 4.53, so just behind The Wise Man's Fear. And this is from just under 700,000 ratings. So these titles obviously are really well known, really well read. A lot of people have put a rating against them, so that's a really good rating to have from that big a sample size. This one is, obviously it's not the latest book. There's 2 more books that have currently been released in the series after this one. I've read both of those books, A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons, and they're obviously a fair bit later on in this list. So Storm of Swords is the people's favourite, it seems, of the Song of Ice and Fire series. This one, it's a book of weddings really, so it's the book with Joffrey's wedding and with the infamous Red wedding, so I wonder if that's got something to do with it, because they're definitely some of the more memorable scenes of the series as a whole, I think. Okay, so 6th place in the list, and we skip past another couple of Galaxy's Edge books, and then we've got The Name of the Wind, and then with a 4.49 rating in 6th place on this list is A Time of Courage of Blood and Bone 3 by John Gwynne. So this is one of my favourite books. It was definitely a 5-star rating from me, and it goes back to what I was saying where I like the later books in a series a lot more, generally speaking, and that definitely applies here, and with a couple of the other ones that are on the list where it's the last book in a series, it's my favourite book in the series, and the general Goodreads kind of public seem to agree with that as well, seem to have the same views. This one, absolutely loved my time in the Banished Lands and A Time of Courage. It's actually in the individual kind of weighted ratings that I do when I review a book. A Time of Courage is actually the one that comes out currently at number 1 in that list. So for me, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's too low in this list. I am surprised at some of the titles that are above it, in particular the Galaxy's Edge title, but obviously it's a much smaller sample size there. But actually, I suppose saying that, the sample size for A Time of Courage is only just under 2,600 ratings, so it's still a reasonably small sample size, but I think 4.49 as an average is definitely in the right place for this particular book. So number 7 on the list, and this is where it gets a little bit strange. This was picked up as well in a video that I saw yesterday. Adrian from All Booked Up noticed this as well. So with Goodreads, and I've got this list sorted by average rating, so the highest rating at the top. And I go from The Name of the Wind at 4.51, A Time of Courage 4.49, and then the next 3 books on the list, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and my next 2 entries on my top 10 are at 4.5. So that's a higher rating than 4.49. Really not sure what's going on there, but I'm just going with the way that Goodreads has randomly ordered these. So number 7 on the list then is The Lord of the Rings. So the edition that I've rated is the one that I've got on my bookshelf, so it's the illustrated edition, and this one with 603,000 ratings has come out with an average of 4.5. So I may displease some people here, but I gave this one actually a 3-star rating. Don't get me wrong, I really love the story of The Lord of the Rings, but I just found the book was not necessarily to my taste. It was a little bit too heavy going. I personally don't think that it stands up against some of today's, I would say today's writing styles rather than necessarily today's stories or today's books, and that's why I prefer more modern books. I just find some of the older books, things like Lord of the Rings, titles like Shannara, David Eddings' works, things like that, I just find that the writing style in them is just a little bit dated. But I definitely find with The Lord of the Rings in particular, it is just so in-depth, it's so detailed, it just makes it kind of really heavy going. So I think my tastes have just moved on a little bit from that, but I really did like the book, but only rated it 3 stars for those reasons. 4.5 anyway for The Lord of the Rings, and yeah, people might lambast me for my personal opinion on it, but it is all personal opinions, and that's what mine is. Next up on the list, and at number 8, and it's an equal rating, 4.5 average out of about 119,000 ratings. This one is A Memory of Light, book 14 in The Wheel of Time, written by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. So this one is my favourite Wheel of Time book. I definitely agree with the rating. I gave it 5 stars when I read it, but I definitely agree with its high average rating and its high place on this list. I've said before, I tend to like later books in the series more because of everything that's built into them with the previous books, and with this one, even if you exclude the prequel New Spring, you've got 13 books that have led to the events that we see here in A Memory of Light. I think pretty much from book 1, everything has really been building up to Tarmangaiden, the final battle, and I just remember when I was reading A Memory of Light, turning a page to a chapter with that title, and it just kept going on and on. I think it was something like 93 pages when I checked it. So I quite like big battles in fantasy if they're well done, and I think this particular one was really well done, and for me to have that and to have it in such a massive chapter, I think that's the biggest chapter I can think of in any book that I've read. 93 pages of this incredibly well planned out, really intense battle. So yeah, really loved it. I thought it was absolutely amazing to have that, and I think it was kind of brave as well actually to have such a massive chapter dedicated to this battle, because I know at the same time a lot of people don't like such big fight scenes, so to have that you'd potentially be alienating some of the readers. But I think, as I say, it's been built up to this point over the course of 13 previous books in the series, and I think it would have been a disservice not to have had such a massive section of the book dedicated to the battle. It would have been a bit anticlimactic really if it was over in 20 pages or something like that. Okay, so moving on to number 9 in the list, and this is another one. We're back to the 4.49 ratings now, and this is Heir of Novron by Michael J. Sullivan. So this one is, depends on how you look at it, but this is the final book in the Rhaenyra Revelation series. So these were originally released self-published as 6 books, and when they were traditionally published by Orbit, they were bound up in 2. So Heir of Novron is essentially books 5 and 6 of the Rhaenyra Revelations. This one, again, final book in the series. I think it was my favourite of the Rhaenyra Revelation series as well, but I did really enjoy all of them. I think I might have rated all of them 5 stars actually. I really enjoyed my time reading these. This one's got 4.49 average from 42,500 ratings, so I think that's definitely in the right kind of ballpark, because I thought it was a really good book and a really fitting end to a great series. And then rounding out the list at number 10, and we're back to John Gwynne. This one is Wrath, book 4 of The Faithful and the Fallen. It's another book with a 4.49 average, this one from 9,700 ratings. So with this one, again, final book in the series, it's right up there for me in my weighted ratings, with A Time of Courage at the top of the list. So definitely feel that it deserves its place on this list, and 4.49 again I think is definitely in the right kind of ballpark for a book to be. Pretty much all of these books being so high, all top 10 and a few books in between from the same series, above 4.5% or 4.49%. So I think those are absolutely fantastic ratings, especially because of the number of ratings all of these books have. I think the lowest one in terms of numbers was just under 1,200 for book 3 on the list, Retributions. So some absolutely fantastic scores for these. To have them all at basically 4.5 or above shows that these are really well loved books overall, and for the most part I completely agree with the ratings. I think the only one, it's not a surprise to me, but I think the only one that I really disagree with would be The Wise Man's Fear. Lord of the Rings is another one that I gave a 3-star rating, but I definitely think that it deserves its place in the list. It's just, it wasn't quite for me, but I know that is an absolute favourite, number 1, 2, 3 in the top 10 list for so many fantasy lovers, and I'm not going to argue with that even if I disagree with it in terms of my own personal list. So there you have it. That is the top 10 best books that I have read according to everyone else on Goodreads. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this list and how close or far apart it is from your own list. Were there any surprises in there in terms of the books or their placement on the list? I'll be interested to know your thoughts. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe if you haven't already done so, and you can see more from me in the future. Next video, I imagine we'll be back in the normal filming location, but until then, take care of yourselves, read some good books, and I'll see you later.